はもう死んでいる。
Before we get into this video, I just wanted to thank anyone from Reddit who saw my guides. In fact, I'm now actually doing 2 VOD reviews because of how well these guys did, hence I'm now using a TTS bot to save me some time. If my audience retention drops, I'll obviously stop using the bot, but without further ado, here's the guide.
Reinhardt's primary fire, Roady Rocket.
Every day! Every day! Every day! I am not your goddamn son! Get the fuck away from me!
Is a massive fucking rocket hammer that deals 75 damage in a 5-meter radius, which can also cleave multiple enemies at once. In general, you always want to be swinging by default, even if nobody's close to you, even if you're coming back from spawn. The main reason why is because there is no disadvantage to just holding down your swing button. You might randomly hit someone out of nowhere, and you slightly protect Reinhardt's hitbox. You can also extend the range of Reinhardt's swing by turning your camera in the same direction that Reinhardt swings. For example, if Reinhardt swings his hammer from right to left, you want to turn your camera in the same direction at the end of the animation. Lastly, Reinhardt's hammer has a bit of a knockback effect which will be helpful in lining up enemies hit by a shatter in order to land a fire strike cleaving multiple enemies. Reinhardt's first ability, the Barrier Boy.
Do me a favor, shut the fuck up.
Is a 1600 health point barrier that decreases your movement speed by 30% and regenerates at 200 shield per second after 2 seconds of not using the shield. Here's 7 vital tips to maximize shield management. Firstly, learn how to shield hop. This is done by jumping forward when you shield, which is useful to preserve shield resource. Secondly, make sure you don't waste shield before a team fight begins, especially if the opposing Reinhardt has shatter.
Look how low your shield's getting. Your shield's low. So your shield's 1100, you go for another fire strike, and you've been above 400 health the entire time. So now, in this fight, do they have shatter? Yes, they have hammer. And before the fight even began, you put your shield to 1100 HP.
Who's frozen?
They've got hammer!
The third, more advanced tip is to weaven your shield throughout the brawl to block and avoid enemy CC stuns. Here's a clip from your Overwatch, commentating over how Mano from the NYXL manages to do this.
We see this again even when the enemy is completely isolated. There's a lot going on here. He sneaks in the hammer swing but blocks the nade, because it's more important to block that than to boneheadedly continue to swing. And look at this from Repel's point of view. Blocks nade, dodges sleep. Repel has nothing to do because the Rein mechanics were too strong.
The fourth tip is to be able to read the state of each team fight in real time to be able to know when to go aggressive and when to play more passive. Again, your Overwatch does a great commentary showing the resource exchange between his own team and the enemy team.
Here on this Volskaya clip, my shield's low, they're zoning me out, I'm antied, I have to regen my shield, but my Lucio gives me sound barrier, so I go aggressive, try to isolate the diva with a shatter. I'm not gonna get the kill and I'm getting low, so I peel back to shield the bomb to secure us there. I get nanoed, so I try to go aggressive again, and you can see this ebb and flow, right? I wanna isolate the healer, try to get a kill on the Lucio, the diva peels, recognizing I'm in a 2v1, it's time to shield before I die, and it's this moment to moment, testing your limits and then backing off when you realize it's too much for you to handle. That's all the difference.
If you're struggling to do this, make sure to always watch the kill feed and either track enemy ultimates or enemy cooldowns to know when you can play aggressively. The fifth tip is to utilize the angle of your shield, as Jane goes to further explain in this clip.
You don't have to go in first like this. One of the things that you can do is if you're trying to shield from here, but you want to protect an ally while they're going into that room, use the angle of your shield to guide them into it.
The sixth tip, which builds off the last tip, is that you can block Transcendence and Sound Barrier by angling your shield between the enemy team. The seventh tip is that you can block an infinite burst of damage such as Diva Bomb even if your shield is extremely low. This is simply done by shielding as soon as the burst damage occurs. More situational cases would be hard shielding whenever your Roadhog, Moira or McCree use their ultimates to put your shield down when you think Sombra is about to emp. And to attempt to win the mind games against McCree's flashbang, you can flick your shield upwards to block his stun. However, he may flash you towards your center of mass when you are doing this. Another important thing to be wary of is that there is a slight third-person delay when bringing up your shield. You can see this on your screen where I go into the third-person animation but the shield isn't there. Keep in mind that I was on 130 ping, which makes this effect much worse. However, it is still present even on normal ping. Reinhardt's second ability, Hellboy.
I don't care! I don't care! Don't care! Don't
is a flaming projectile that Reinhardt tosses in a straight line, piercing enemies, dealing 100 damage. It also has a cast time of 0.48 seconds and a recovery time of 0.64 seconds, which I will mention later. As this ability has a slow movement speed, you'll most likely be using this to gain ult charge and not perform any skill shots. Here's some basic Reinhardt tech for Fire Strike. Abuse the 0.48 seconds of cast time and cover, then peek your head out to land your Fire Strike. Secondly, swing your hammer, then perform an animation cancelled by using Fire Strike immediately afterwards, dealing more damage in a shorter period of time. Lastly, you can perform a back Fire Strike by fire striking in the opposite direction that your shield is facing. There are also a few mind games, as Jane states in this clip.
If I just see a Rein who is not fire striking at all, it's completely fucking obvious that they have hammer. So if the Zarya likes to use the projected bubble to farm energy, what you can do is actually fire strike above the Reinhardt's head to bait a bubble without giving the Zarya energy and without feeding the support's ultimate charge. There, big brain.
Reinhardt's third ability, Kamey-Kazi.
And I said, after that point in time, I was like, don't ever ask me to fucking come here again.
Makes Reinhardt charge in a straight line for 50 meters, in which he can carry an enemy into a wall. If he pins an enemy into a wall, he deals 300 damage, whereas if he bumps someone during his pin, it will deal 50 damage. The pin is quite straightforward in terms of usage. If a Reinhardt pins towards you, use your pin to knock each other into the ground. Similarly, you can do this same trick against a Brigite Bash or a Doomfist Rocket Punch. The more advanced part of using pin is the part which will dictate whether you make a play or you feed completely. In essence, there are two main things to take into consideration: the distance and angle of your pin.
So this is the charge that I made. Like I said, a short distance, and considering that my team were very close, I had the payload for cover, and the enemy team was kind of far away, it's a pretty safe charge. The enemy Rein, however, makes a charge like this. Immediately, you can see the difference in length. So they've broken the first rule about the distance of your charge. However, the other problem is that the enemy Rein hasn't considered the angle of the charge either, and now finds themselves completely exposed to lots of source of damage from lots of angles.
Also important to note that you cannot perform a back pin, whereas you can perform a back fire strike or a back shatter, and you can extend the distance of your pin by jumping at the very end of the animation, as you can clearly see with the comparison on the screen to see how much farther you go by performing the little hop. Reinhardt's passive, Rocc.
How can you be that fucking stupid, my nigga? Like, what the fuck?
Makes all CC knockback effects lessened by 30%. So for instance, Lucio Boop will push you 30% less far. This does not apply with stuns. For example, you will still be affected by Orisa Halt. There isn't much to this other than realizing that you can play against edges of a map more effectively, and that you can be more aggressive even against Brig Flail or Lucio Boop. Reinhardt's ultimate, Shatter.
I can't fucking compete! I just can't fucking compete! Can you get the fuck out of my face?
Makes Reinhardt slam his hammer into the ground, in which takes 0.45 seconds to cast, travels a maximum distance of 20 meters, and will deal 50 damage to anyone hit by it. The general rule to follow up enemies in a shatter is to swing, then crouch, then fire strike, killing any squishy hero. You want to crouch before fire strike so that the hitbox manages to hit enemies on the ground, and you also want to abuse the slight knockback from your hammer to line enemies in a straight line for fire strike. You can also use pin a tank at the very end of shatter to build 20% ult charge for your next shatter. When talking about shatter, the two main things to focus upon would be learning how to land and block them, before diving into the former out of the two. Here's a few pieces of tech that you should keep in mind. Firstly, shatter can travel underneath the payload. Secondly, shatter has a small vertical height of 2 meters, meaning that you can shatter enemies on top of the payload. Thirdly, due to the cast time of 0.45 seconds, you can be stunned or hacked during this animation. Hence make sure you track cooldowns such as flashbang or hack. Fourthly, cooldown track both bubbles from Zarya to avoid accidentally shattering into her bubble. Lastly, only jump before shatter to shatter past the shield. Otherwise, do not jump, as this will provide a bigger window for the enemy Reinhardt to block shatter. Now, before talking about how to consistently land shatters, here's a clip from Grandmaster main tank streamer, Octatroth, talk about how to use shatter after the nerf in which the stun duration was decreased.
The best way to get value out of Reinhardt now is to literally hold Reinhardt. Not using Reinhardt ult is so much better than using Reinhardt ult. So if you hold Reinhardt ult, the enemy Rein has to play the game differently to then when you don't have Reinhardt ult, because he knows he can't be punished for any mistakes. Or if you're talking about how to actually use Reinhardt ult now, just solo shatter someone. Solo shatter an off tank.
Keep in mind, this piece of advice is aimed towards players who are above master, since there are so many mistakes to exploit with shatter in the lower ranks. talking about how to land these bad boys depend on your playstyle and how fast you manage to charge Shatter, as if you charge it quickly, the enemy team may not expect a Shatter coming in quickly. Alternatively, you could be the sneaky Reinhardt and hide in a corner of the map, telling your team to fall back to then land a Shatter on a nano-aware Reinhardt. A consistent way to land Shatter is using it when the opposing Reinhardt uses Fire Strike. Reinhardt's Fire Strike animation can't be cancelled, hence you can abuse this. However, in the higher ranks, Reinhardts typically won't use Fire Strike when they think you have Shatter, hence alternatively, apply pressure via landing swing after swing. By applying high pressure, the Reinhardt will be more prone to buckle, and will either use pin or Shatter, in which time you can block and land your own Shatter as he shouldn't be expecting it straight after. Nanoboost and Grav can also be counterintuitive in the sense that most Reinhardts will attempt to Shatter against a nanoboosted Reinhardt or, whilst they are in a Grav in order to deny follow-up, so make sure you keep a mental note of this in order to block the opposing Shatter, whether it be hard shielding, or fake swinging in front of the opposing Reinhardt to bait Shatter. Up against double shield comps, you want to be finding small gaps within the enemy shielding to land your Shatter. This is typically a high risk high reward play and sometimes you'll land Shatters straight into shields. However, by the process of putting your reaction times under stress, you'll become better at exploiting these gaps. As a starter tip, you'll often see little to no shielding as the enemy team plays passive around a corner to gain shield resource back. Hence you can jump around a corner and Shatter multiple players, which is what I did in this clip. Despite this being a blind Shatter, it will work more times than not in the higher ranks as better players will save shield resource when approaching around a corner. Aside from the Nanoboost and Grav tip, other ways to block Shatter is to bully the opposing brain with hammer swings, then pull up your shield as soon as you see the animation of Reinhardt pulling his hammer past his shoulder. You can also do quick 180-degree turn by feinting in the other direction, then quickly whipping around as you hear the voice line go off. The last tip is to shield hop backwards to prevent the enemy Reinhardt jump shattering past your shield. The next section of the guide is really about team composition as a whole. Reinhardt is a character whose success or failure strongly relies upon how many resources your team pours into you. For example, Nanoboost will benefit you more than Coalescence, with the trade-off being a lack of survivability for your armor. Shield break is also a key factor in dictating how aggressive you can play as Reinhardt, although where you path as a team can also minimize the effect of going against a high shield break team. For instance, if the enemy team are spamming down the main choke in Temple of Anubis second point, you can either go left or right to abuse the natural cover to save shield. The penultimate part of this guide is positioning yourself with Reinhardt. I'm going to keep this short, but basically, stick to corners as much as you can, don't open too wide of an angle to get a cleave fire strike, and make sure your backline has line of sight onto you even when you turn around a corner. Those who are familiar with my Zenyatta guide will have watched the clip of Jane describing this, where you ideally want to path in a direction to where your Zen has line of sight to both front lines. Another minor positioning tip would be to position yourself to where you can keep your options open depending on what the enemy team do.
You hold this space so aggressively, you completely give up this space for free, and the opponent can just move in through a pretty difficult choke to deal with. So a much better position for you to actually stay is going to be right here behind the truck. There's a couple different reasons for this, but the first being that you are going to be able to equally threaten both sides. If anybody tries to walk through, you can kind of move in, fight them, and then go back to recover. It's much safer.
Finally, the last bit of this guide, tank synergies Reinhardt and Orisa, high amount of cover, and in combination with a BAP, you can pull off the hold plus fire strike plus matrix combo, just like Toronto Defiant did against Atlanta Reign. Other than that, if you're playing in a position where you can't swing because you're too far away from the team fight, you might as well be playing Sigma. Reinhardt and Sigma, this tank duo has the most amount of mathematical shielding, although there is no direct synergy. A small tip would be to pin the opposing tank player when they are coming down from your Sigma's flux. Reinhardt and Diva, this is maximized for brawl and the ability to contest high grounds, hence this duo is especially powerful on maps such as Watchpoint Gibraltar. Diva also has the potential to peel for your glass cannon backline Reinhardt and Roadhog. This is maximized for shield break alongside an aggressive playstyle, as Roadhog is typically a selfish pick with a dedicated self-heal. You'll be receiving most of the heals on the front line, allowing you to be more aggressive. Reinhardt and Wrecking Ball, this is dedicated towards distraction and a more passive playstyle as you acknowledge that you will be alone on the front line. You can go aggressive for when your hamster dives in as this will direct attention and focus elsewhere. However, in a straight up frontline versus frontline matchup, you will lose. Reinhardt and Winston, this has a slightly better synergy than the previous combo due to the Winston barrier being used to block important cooldowns such as nade, which can prevent you from being aggressive. Although target priority may differ, Reinhardt and Zarya. This is the most classic combo in which Zarya can gain energy from you taking damage whilst you swing, and you can effectively cycle ultimates by swinging into Zarya's Graviton Surge. The only weakness is a lack of off-angle coverage alongside close to no peel for your backline, in which you might want to consider your Zarya swapping to a diva. Well, that's it for the guide. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, subscribe and comment. If this video also helped to raise your IQ, be sure to share it with your friends to also raise theirs. Until next time.
Fuck you. Big boy without big broom. Big boy how I come through. Big boy without brand new cause I'm killing it.